I was standing at my kitchen window with a cup of coffee when I saw three men in orange vests dismantling my fence, and within 30 seconds I watched them load my brand new cedar posts onto a pickup truck and drive away like they owned the place. My name is Ryan Jennings, and I had lived in the Riverside Meadows subdivision in Gilbert, Arizona for exactly 8 months. The neighborhood was one of those cookie-cutter developments where every house looked like it had been stamped from the same mold, painted in various shades of beige and tan that the HOA deemed aesthetically harmonious. I had bought the place after my divorce, thinking a fresh start in a quiet suburb would be exactly what I needed. What I didn't know was that I was moving into a battleground run by a woman who treated property management like a personal fiefdom. I threw open my back door and sprinted across my yard, still holding my coffee mug. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" The three men stopped, looking at each other with confused expressions. One of them, a heavy-set guy with a sunburned face, scratched his head. "We're just following orders, man. HOA sent us to collect these posts." "Collect them? Those are my fence posts. I installed them 3 weeks ago." The sunburned guy pulled out a crumpled work order from his back pocket. "Says here we're supposed to remove non-compliant fencing materials from 2847 Sagebrush Lane. That's this address, right?" "Non-compliant? I submitted my fence design to the HOA 2 months ago. I have the approval email." Another worker, a younger guy with a ponytail, shrugged. "Look, we don't know anything about that. We just do what the HOA tells us. You'll have to take it up with them." I felt my blood pressure rising. "You can't just take my property. Put those posts back right now." "Sorry, man, we're just contractors. If you have a problem, call the HOA office." The sunburned guy gestured to his crew, and they continued loading the last few posts onto their truck. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "I'm documenting this. You're stealing my property." "It's not stealing if the HOA authorized it," Ponytail Guy said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced of his own argument. I watched helplessly as they drove away with roughly $2,000 worth of premium cedar fence posts that I had carefully selected and installed myself. The holes in my backyard where the posts had been looked like open wounds in the earth, accusatory and stark. Back inside my house, I immediately pulled up the HOA's approval email from my inbox. There it was, clear as day, dated April 15th. "Your fence installation has been approved pending final inspection. Please ensure all materials meet community standards as outlined in Section 7.3 of the HOA Covenant." I had followed every single guideline. The posts were 6 inches by 6 inches, untreated cedar, exactly as specified. The height was correct. The placement was measured to the inch from my property line. I called the HOA office. The phone rang 8 times before someone picked up. "Riverside Meadows HOA, this is Brenda speaking." "This is Ryan Jennings at 2847 Sagebrush. I just had workers remove my fence posts from my backyard, claiming the HOA authorized it. I need to speak to someone about this immediately." "Oh, Mr. Jennings. Yes, I have notes about your property here. The Architectural Review Committee found your fence installation to be non-compliant with community standards." "That's impossible. I have written approval. I followed every guideline." "I'm just reading what's in the system, sir. You'll need to speak with Patricia Cunningham, our HOA president. She's the one who ordered the removal." Of course it was Patricia. I had only met the woman once at a neighborhood meeting where she had spent 45 minutes lecturing everyone about the proper shade of white for mailbox posts. She was exactly what you'd imagine when you heard the word Karen. Mid-50s, short blonde hair cut in that aggressive helmet style, always wearing a pantsuit that looked like she was perpetually on her way to manage a struggling retail store. "When can I speak with her?" "She's quite busy, but I can schedule you for next Thursday at 4. "Next Thursday? That's 6 days from now. She just stole my fence posts." "The HOA doesn't steal, Mr. Jennings. We enforce community standards, and Mrs. Cunningham's calendar is completely full until then." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. Instead, I spent the next 2 hours reviewing every page of the HOA covenant, the architectural guidelines, and my approval documents. There was absolutely nothing wrong with my fence. I had dotted every I and crossed every T. This was either a massive administrative error or something more deliberate. The next morning, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. I needed to clear my head, and maybe gather some evidence that other people had similar fences without issue. 3 houses down, the Hendersons had an almost identical cedar fence. 2 streets over, there were at least 5 properties with the same style posts I had used. None of them had been deemed non-compliant. As I walked past Patricia Cunningham's house on Willow Creek Drive, I noticed unusual activity. There were construction materials scattered across her front yard, and I could hear the sound of power tools coming from behind her house. Curious, I walked down the sidewalk, trying to get a better view of her backyard without being too obvious. What I saw made my jaw drop. There, in Patricia's backyard, workers were constructing an elaborate deck, and the support posts, the vertical posts that held up the deck structure, looked remarkably familiar. I moved closer, pretending to tie my shoe while I got a better look. They were my posts, my exact cedar posts with the same grain pattern, the same dimensions. I could even see where I had made a small pencil mark on one of them when I was measuring. I pulled out my phone and started taking photos and video, making sure to capture clear shots of the posts and the overall construction. My hands were shaking with anger. This wasn't just an HOA enforcement action, this was theft. She had stolen my building materials to use for her own personal construction project. I walked home quickly, my mind racing through possible next steps. When I got back to my house, I sat down at my computer and started downloading all the security camera footage from my backyard camera. I had installed a full security system when I moved in, including a high-definition camera that overlooked my backyard. I pulled up the footage from the morning the workers had taken my posts. The video was crystal clear. It showed the 3 workers arriving at 7:30 in the morning, consulting a work order, and then systematically removing my fence posts. But more importantly, I had footage from the previous 3 weeks showing me installing those posts, measuring them, marking them. I had inadvertently created a complete chain of custody. I kept digging through footage and found something even more interesting. 2 days before my posts were removed, there was a clip from my front door camera showing Patricia Cunningham walking around my fence, taking photos with her phone and making notes on a clipboard. The timestamp was clear. She had personally inspected my fence 48 hours before ordering its removal. Now I had a decision to make. I could wait until Thursday and try to resolve this through official HOA channels, or I could take more immediate action. Given that Patricia had literally stolen my property to use for her own deck, I decided the situation called for legal intervention. I spent the rest of the day consulting with a property attorney named Marcus Webb. His office was in downtown Gilbert, in a small suite above a coffee shop. Marcus was in his early 40s, with graying hair and the weary expression of someone who had dealt with HOA disputes before. "Let me get this straight," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. "The HOA president ordered the removal of your fence posts, claiming they were non-compliant, but you have written approval. And now you have photographic evidence that those same posts are being used to build a deck at her personal residence." "That's exactly what happened. I have video footage of the removal, photos of the posts at her house, and all my approval documents." Marcus whistled low. "That's not just an HOA violation. That's theft, possibly conversion of property. And if she used her position to facilitate it, there could be embezzlement or fraud charges. How much were the materials worth?" "About $2,000 for the posts alone, plus the labor I put into installing them, which was about 40 hours of work." "And you're certain they're the same posts?" I pulled up the photos on my phone, zooming in on a distinctive knot pattern in the wood grain. "I marked this one with a pencil. You can see it here in my backyard and here in the construction at her house." Marcus nodded slowly. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. First, I'm going to draft a demand letter to the HOA and to Patricia Cunningham personally. We'll demand immediate return of your property and compensation for damages. Second, I'm going to advise you to file a police report. This is theft, plain and simple. The fact that she used her HOA authority to commit it might actually make it worse for her. Will the police actually do anything about a civil HOA dispute? This isn't a civil dispute anymore. She took your property under false pretenses and used it for her own benefit. That's criminal theft. The HOA aspect is just the method she used to commit the crime." I left Marcus's office feeling slightly better. At least I had a plan now. My next stop was the Gilbert Police Department on Civic Center Drive. The station was a modern building with desert landscaping and the kind of institutional architecture that government buildings always seem to have. The officer at the front desk, a young woman named Officer Stevens, listened to my story with increasing interest. "Do you have documentation of all this?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the videos and photos. Her eyebrows went up as she watched the footage. "Okay, this is definitely something we can investigate. Let me get a detective down here." She picked up her phone and made a quick call. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in a small conference room with Detective Raymond Cole, a man in his 50s with the patient demeanor of someone who had seen every kind of human foolishness imaginable. I walked him through everything: the fence installation, the approval process, the removal, and the evidence that my posts were now part of Patricia's deck. "You mentioned you have video of the actual removal?" Detective Cole asked. I pulled up the footage on my phone. He watched it carefully, occasionally asking me to pause or replay sections. "And you're prepared to identify these as your specific posts?" "I can identify unique grain patterns, knots in the wood, and there's even a pencil mark I made. Plus, I have receipts for the purchase from Mountain States Lumber." Detective Cole nodded. "All right, Mr. Jennings, I'm going to open an investigation. This appears to be theft by conversion at minimum. The value puts it above our threshold for a felony charge, which is anything over $1,000 in Arizona. I'll need you to make a formal statement and provide copies of all your documentation." The formal statement took another hour. I walked Detective Cole through every detail, from the day I bought the house to the moment I saw my posts being used in Patricia's deck construction. He took notes methodically, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "One thing I want to confirm," he said. "You're certain that the HOA work order was not legitimate, that you were in full compliance with all requirements?" "I have the approval email, and I followed every single guideline in their architectural standards. I can prove compliance with every measurement and specification." "Good. That helps establish that the removal was done under false pretenses. If she knew the fence was compliant and ordered removal anyway, that shows intent." When I finally left the police station, it was nearly 5 in the evening. I was exhausted but felt like I had finally taken concrete steps to address the situation. As I drove home, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize with a local area code. "Hello? Mr. Jennings, this is Patricia Cunningham from the Riverside Meadows HOA. Her voice was crisp and businesslike, with an undertone of irritation. "I understand you've been taking photographs of my property without permission." I was walking on a public sidewalk and noticed construction materials that appeared to be my stolen property. "Stolen? That's a serious accusation. The fence posts were removed because they violated our community standards. They're now property of the HOA and are being repurposed for community improvement projects." "Your personal deck is not a community improvement project." There was a long pause. "I don't appreciate your tone, Mr. Jennings. As HOA president, I have discretion in how confiscated materials are used. The deck at my residence will be used for hosting HOA meetings and community events." "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You stole my property for your personal use." "I did no such thing. You violated HOA covenants, your materials were forfeited, and they're being used appropriately. If you continue to harass me or make false accusations, the HOA will be forced to take further action, including fines and possible legal action." "You know what? Go ahead. Because I've already filed a police report and hired an attorney. Detective Raymond Cole is handling my case. You might want to get your own lawyer." Another pause, longer this time. When Patricia spoke again, her voice had lost some of its confidence. "You called the police?" "I did. Theft is a criminal matter. The fact that you abused your HOA authority to commit it probably makes it worse." "This is absurd. I'll be speaking to the HOA's legal counsel about this harassment." She hung up before I could respond. I allowed myself a small smile. I had rattled her, which meant she knew her position was weak. Over the next few days, things escalated quickly. I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney, a firm called Sanderson and Associates, demanding that I cease and desist from making defamatory statements about Patricia Cunningham and threatening legal action if I continued. I forwarded the letter to Marcus, who seemed almost gleeful. "This is great for us," he said when I called him. "They're already on the defensive. A cease and desist letter is usually a sign that they know they're in trouble and are trying to intimidate you into backing down." So what do? We respond with our own demand letter. I'll have it ready by tomorrow, and I'll make it clear that we have substantial evidence of theft and that Ms. Cunningham's use of her HOA position to facilitate personal gain may constitute fraud. Marcus was true to his word. The next day, I received a copy of his letter to the HOA. It was beautifully brutal, laying out the entire sequence of events with cold legal precision. It demanded immediate return of the fence posts or financial compensation of $5,000, which included the cost of materials, labor, and damages. It also put them on notice that we were prepared to file a civil lawsuit and that we had already filed a criminal complaint. The Thursday meeting I had originally scheduled with Patricia arrived. I showed up at the HOA office at exactly 4 o'clock. The office was in a small commercial strip mall on Williams Field Road, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a tax preparation service. Inside, the space was cramped and smelled like old carpet and coffee. Brenda, the receptionist, looked up nervously when I walked in. "Mr. Jennings, Mrs. Cunningham is running a bit late." "I'll wait." I sat in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs and pulled out my phone, reviewing my notes. 15 minutes passed, then 30. At 4:45, I stood up. "Is Mrs. Cunningham actually coming?" Brenda looked uncomfortable. "She called and said she needed to reschedule. She's dealing with some urgent community matters." "Urgent matters like talking to her lawyer about the theft charges?" Brenda's face flushed. "I don't know anything about that. Tell Mrs. Cunningham that she can reschedule all she wants, but Detective Cole will be contacting her soon and she won't be able to avoid that meeting." I left the office feeling frustrated, but not surprised. Patricia was clearly trying to avoid direct confrontation, probably on advice from her attorney. But avoidance wouldn't make the problem go away. That evening, I got a call from Detective Cole. "Mr. Jennings, I wanted to update you on our investigation. I visited Mrs. Cunningham's residence today with a warrant to photograph and document the construction materials being used in her deck. I can confirm that the posts match the description and measurements you provided. We also found your pencil mark on one of the support posts." So what happens now? I'm going to request additional documentation from the HOA, including the work order they issued and any internal communications about your fence. If everything checks out the way I expect it will, I'll be recommending charges to the county attorney, most likely theft and fraud. How long will that take? Could be a few weeks. These things don't move fast, but I want you to know we're taking this seriously. The evidence is pretty clear-cut. Over the next 2 weeks, life in Riverside Meadows became increasingly tense. Word had gotten around the neighborhood about my dispute with Patricia. I started receiving visits from other homeowners who had their own horror stories about HOA overreach. My neighbor, Jeff Martinez, came over one evening with a 6-pack of beer. "Dude, I heard about your fence posts. That's insane." We sat on my back porch, looking at the sad post holes that still remained in my yard. "Yeah, it's been a nightmare. Patricia tried to fine me $500 last year because my garage door was the wrong shade of white. She literally stood in my driveway with a paint swatch, comparing it to some approved color chart. It was off by maybe 2 shades. Did you pay it? Hell no. I fought it, got a bunch of neighbors to testify that my garage door was the same color as 10 other houses in the subdivision. Eventually, the HOA board overruled her, but she made my life miserable for months. She'd drive by my house every day, taking pictures, looking for other violations. Another neighbor, Susan Alvarez, stopped by the following weekend. She was a nurse who worked night shifts and was generally exhausted. Ryan, I heard you're taking legal action against Patricia? Yeah, she stole my fence posts. Susan shook her head in amazement. That woman is out of control. Last month she tried to fine me because my trash cans were visible from the street for more than 12 hours. I work nights. I put them out before I leave for my shift and bring them in when I get home. She wanted me to wake up after working a 12-hour shift just to move trash cans. These conversations revealed a pattern. Patricia had been abusing her authority for years, using her position to harass homeowners over trivial issues. The fence post theft was just the most egregious example of her behavior. I started organizing. With Marcus's help, I drafted a petition to recall Patricia as HOA president. According to the HOA bylaws, we needed signatures from 30% of homeowners to trigger a recall election. I started going door to door, explaining the situation and asking for support. The response was overwhelming. Within a week, I had signatures from 40% of the neighborhood. People were fed up. At a community meeting I organized in the clubhouse, more than 60 homeowners showed up, filling the room beyond capacity. I stood at the front of the room, feeling nervous but determined. Thank you all for coming. I know everyone here has experienced problems with how our HOA is being managed. I want to share what happened to me, and then I want to hear your stories. I walked them through everything: the fence approval, the theft of my posts, discovering them at Patricia's house, and the ongoing legal and criminal proceedings. I showed them photos and video footage on a projector screen. The room erupted in angry murmurs. "She stole from you?" one man called out. "That's exactly what happened, and I don't think I'm the only one who's been mistreated." For the next hour, homeowners shared their stories. The room buzzed with anger and frustration. Patricia had fined people for lawn height deviations of less than half an inch. She had rejected paint colors that were listed as approved in the official guidelines. She had threatened legal action against a family for having a decorative garden gnome that she deemed aesthetically inappropriate. By the end of the meeting, we had enough signatures to force a recall election, and a group of volunteers had formed to run alternative candidates for the HOA board. I felt energized. This wasn't just about my fence posts anymore. This was about reclaiming the neighborhood from someone who had turned community management into a personal power trip. Patricia, of course, did not take this well. The next day, I found a notice taped to my front door. It was from the HOA, signed by Patricia, listing 17 alleged violations of community standards. My mailbox was the wrong height. My front door wreath was not seasonally appropriate. My lawn had visible weeds. My house number font was non-compliant. The list went on and on, each alleged violation carrying a $100 fine. The total came to $1,700. I called Marcus immediately. "She's retaliating. This is absurd." Marcus chuckled. "This is actually perfect. Retaliation is illegal under Arizona HOA law. Save that notice. It's more evidence for our case." "So I don't have to pay these fines?" "Absolutely not. In fact, this probably just added another cause of action to our lawsuit. I'll send a letter to the HOA board members individually, informing them that they could be personally liable if they allow Patricia to continue this behavior." Marcus's letter had an immediate effect. 2 days later, I received a call from a man named Donald Pemberton, who identified himself as the vice president of the HOA board. "Mr. Jennings, I want to apologize on behalf of the board. We were not aware of the full extent of the situation with your fence posts until recently. Several board members have reviewed your documentation, and we believe there may have been serious procedural errors." "Procedural errors?" "She stole my property." "Yes, well, that's a matter for the authorities to sort out, but from an HOA perspective, we're prepared to offer a resolution. We'd like to reimburse you for the cost of the materials and issue a formal apology." "What about the fraudulent fines she just issued?" "Those will be rescinded immediately. And between you and me, there's growing support on the board for Patricia to step down as president." "Step down? She should be removed and charged. That's also being discussed. But I wanted to reach out directly and let you know that not everyone on the board supports her actions." The conversation was encouraging, but I wasn't ready to accept any settlement until the criminal investigation was complete. I wanted Patricia to face consequences for what she had done. 3 weeks after I filed the police report, Detective Cole called with news. "Mr. Jennings, the county attorney has agreed to file charges. Patricia Cunningham is being charged with theft, fraud, and abuse of power. She'll be arrested tomorrow morning." I felt a surge of satisfaction. What happens next? "She'll be booked, arraigned, and given a court date. Given the nature of the charges and the evidence, I expect she'll probably try to negotiate a plea deal, but that's up to the prosecutors and her defense attorney." "Will I have to testify?" Probably, if it goes to trial. But I think once she sees the evidence we have, she'll take a deal. The next morning, I happened to be checking my front security camera feed when I saw a Gilbert police cruiser pull up in front of Patricia's house. 2 officers got out and walked to her front door. The camera didn't have audio, but I could see Patricia answering the door, her face shifting from confusion to shock as the officers spoke to her. Then I watched as they handcuffed her and led her to the police car. I won't lie, it felt good to see. She had abused her power, stolen from me, and harassed an entire neighborhood. Now she was facing consequences. The arrest made the local news. A reporter from the Gilbert Tribune called me for a comment, and I gave a brief statement about HOA accountability and the importance of transparency in community governance. The story ran the next day with the headline, "HOA President Arrested for Theft Fraud." Within hours, it had been picked up by several Phoenix area news outlets. My phone started ringing constantly. Other news stations wanted interviews. Neighbors wanted updates. My story had apparently struck a nerve. People across the valley had their own HOA horror stories, and my case had become a symbol of the fight against overreaching community associations. Patricia's attorney tried to do damage control, issuing a statement that she had acted in good faith and that any irregularities were the result of administrative confusion, not criminal intent. No one was buying it. The evidence was too clear. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Patricia as president. Donald Pemberton took over as interim president and immediately began implementing reforms. He sent a letter to all homeowners apologizing for Patricia's actions and promising a comprehensive review of all HOA decisions made during her tenure. My civil case moved forward alongside the criminal prosecution. Marcus filed a formal lawsuit against Patricia personally and against the HOA for failing to provide adequate oversight. The lawsuit sought compensation for the theft of my property, punitive damages for retaliation, and a court order requiring HOA governance reforms. 6 weeks after Patricia's arrest, her attorney approached Marcus about a settlement. The HOA's insurance company was willing to pay $25,000 to make the case go away. Marcus called me to discuss. $25,000 is a solid offer. It covers your damages and provides substantial compensation for the hassle and stress you've endured. What about Patricia personally? She'd have to contribute $5,000 out of pocket, and she'd agree to permanently resign from any HOA position. She'd also be barred from serving on any HOA board in Arizona for 10 years. I thought about it. The money was appealing, but what I really wanted was accountability. What about the criminal case? That proceeds regardless of our civil settlement. The county attorney isn't dropping charges. Then I'll accept the settlement, as long as she faces criminal consequences. The settlement was finalized 2 weeks later. The HOA issued me a check for $20,000, and Patricia's attorney delivered a separate check for $5,000, along with a formal letter of resignation from all HOA positions. The letter included a brief apology that read, more like it was written by her attorney than by Patricia herself, but I didn't care. She was out. The criminal case took longer to resolve. Patricia's attorney negotiated a plea deal with the county attorney. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of theft and 1 count of fraud. The charges carried potential prison time, but given that this was her first offense and the stolen property had been recovered, the prosecutor agreed to recommend probation. At her sentencing hearing, I was allowed to make a victim impact statement. I stood in the courtroom, looking at Patricia sitting at the defense table. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by the legal proceedings. "Your Honor," I began, "what Patricia Cunningham did wasn't just about fence posts. It was about abuse of power and betrayal of trust. She was entrusted with managing our community, and she used that position to steal from a homeowner for her own benefit. She then tried to cover it up by issuing fraudulent fines as retaliation. Her actions affected not just me, but an entire neighborhood that lived in fear of arbitrary enforcement and petty harassment. I hope the court sends a message that this kind of behavior is unacceptable." The judge, a serious-looking woman named Judge Martinez, listened carefully. When I finished, she addressed Patricia directly. "Ms. Cunningham, you held a position of trust in your community. Your actions represent a serious abuse of that trust. While I'm accepting the plea agreement, I want to be clear that this court takes these matters very seriously. You're being sentenced to 3 years of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and you're ordered to pay full restitution to Mr. Jennings. Additionally, I'm ordering that you have no involvement in any homeowner association governance during your probationary period. If you violate the terms of your probation, you will face jail time. Do you understand?" Patricia nodded, her voice barely audible. "Yes, Your Honor." Walking out of the courthouse that day, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't experienced in months. Justice had been served, not perfectly, but adequately. Patricia had faced consequences for her actions. I had been compensated for my losses, and the HOA was under new management committed to reform. Back in Riverside Meadows, life slowly returned to normal. Donald Pemberton proved to be a competent and reasonable HOA president. He implemented new policies requiring board approval for any property enforcement actions, created a transparent appeals process for homeowners, and established term limits to prevent any one person from accumulating too much power. I reinstalled my fence, this time with new posts that I purchased with part of the settlement money. Several neighbors came over to help, turning it into an impromptu block party. We grilled burgers, drank beer, and swapped stories about the Patricia era, now safely in the past. Jeff Martinez raised his beer bottle in a toast. To Ryan, for having the guts to stand up to that crazy woman. To accountability, I countered, and to hoping our HOA remembers this lesson. The fence went up quickly, with multiple people helping. By sunset, it was complete, standing straight and sturdy. I stepped back to admire the work, feeling satisfied not just with the fence, but with everything it represented. Over the following months, I became more involved in community governance, attending board meetings and volunteering for committees. I never wanted to be HOA president. The whole experience had cured me of any desire for that particular headache, but I believed in staying engaged to ensure the reform stuck. The local media attention brought unexpected benefits. Several people reached out to me for advice on their own HOA disputes. I connected them with Marcus, who was building quite a practice in HOA law. The story had raised awareness about the need for checks and balances in community association governance. Arizona state legislators even took notice. A representative from Legislative District 12 contacted me about testifying in support of new legislation that would strengthen homeowner protections and increase transparency requirements for HOAs. I agreed, and several months later, I found myself at the state capitol in Phoenix telling my story to a legislative committee. The bill eventually passed, requiring HOAs to maintain detailed records of all enforcement actions, creating a state-level oversight board for homeowner complaints, and establishing penalties for board members who abused their authority. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a step in the right direction. As for Patricia, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and her husband put their house up for sale shortly after her sentencing. They moved to Scottsdale, presumably to start over somewhere people didn't know about her criminal conviction. Her elaborate deck, built with my stolen fence posts, was left unfinished. The new owners who bought the house ended up tearing it down and starting over, which felt like poetic justice. My security cameras, which had captured the entire incident, became something of a legend in the neighborhood. Several neighbors upgraded their own security systems, joking that if Patricia had taught them anything, it was to document everything. I couldn't argue with that logic. One evening, about a year after the whole saga began, I was sitting on my back porch, enjoying the Arizona sunset and admiring my fence. The cedar had weathered beautifully, developing a silver-gray patina that looked even better than the original honey color. Susan Alvarez stopped by with a bottle of wine. "I'm moving," she announced. "Got a job offer in Flagstaff. Better pay, closer to my family." "Congratulations. We'll miss you around here. I'll miss this place too, now that it's actually livable. You know, before you stood up to Patricia, I was seriously considering moving just to get away from the HOA insanity. A lot of us were. I just did what needed to be done. I'm glad it worked out." Susan smiled. "You did more than that. You reminded everyone that we don't have to accept abuse from people in authority. That's worth something." After she left, I sat alone with my thoughts. The whole experience had been exhausting, stressful, and at times infuriating, but it had also been strangely rewarding. I had discovered a strength I didn't know I possessed, a willingness to fight for what was right, even when it would have been easier to just let it go. The fence stood as a physical reminder of that fight. Every time I looked at it, I remembered not just the theft and the legal battle, but the community that had come together, the reforms that had been implemented, and the small victory for accountability in a system that too often let petty tyrants run unchecked. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos and videos I had taken during the whole ordeal. The footage of the workers removing my posts, the photos of those same posts at Patricia's house, the documentation that had made the entire case possible. It occurred to me how differently things might have gone if I hadn't had that evidence. The next weekend, the HOA held its annual community meeting at the clubhouse. Under Donald's leadership, these meetings had become actually productive, focusing on real community issues rather than Patricia's bizarre enforcement priorities. I attended, taking my usual seat in the back row. Donald ran through the agenda efficiently. Budget updates, upcoming maintenance projects, discussion of a new playground for the community park. Then he reached the final item. Before we adjourn, I want to propose something. The board has been discussing ways to memorialize the reforms we've implemented over the past year. We believe strongly that transparency and accountability should be the foundation of our governance. To that end, we're proposing to amend our HOA covenants to include a homeowner bill of rights, establishing clear protections and appeal processes. The room erupted in applause. Donald waited for it to die down before continuing. This wouldn't have happened without Ryan Jennings, who had the courage to challenge an abuse of power and see it through to the end. Ryan, would you like to say anything? I hadn't prepared a speech, but I stood up anyway. I just want to say that what happened to me could have happened to anyone. Patricia Cunningham abused her authority because she thought no one would challenge her. The lesson here isn't about me or my fence posts. It's about all of us having the responsibility to hold our leaders accountable, to speak up when something isn't right, and to support each other when someone does take a stand. I'm proud of this community for coming together and demanding better. More applause followed. After the meeting, at least a dozen people came up to shake my hand or share their appreciation. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. Driving home that night, I reflected on how much had changed in just 1 year. I had moved to Riverside Meadows looking for a quiet, peaceful place to rebuild my life after divorce. Instead, I had found myself in the middle of a battle over community governance, property rights, and the rule of law. I had been forced to become an activist, an advocate, and a symbol of resistance against HOA overreach. But through it all, I had also found community. Real community, not the artificial harmony that Patricia had tried to enforce through fines and harassment, but the genuine connections that form when people work together toward a common goal. I had made friends, learned about local government, and discovered that I actually enjoyed being involved in civic life. The fence posts incident had taught me something important. Documentation matters, evidence matters, standing up for yourself matters, and sometimes what starts as a personal grievance can become a catalyst for broader change. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment, looking at my house. The fence was visible from the front, running along the side yard. In the fading light, it looked solid and permanent, a boundary that protected my space and my rights. Inside, I made dinner and settled in for the evening. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Saw the news about the covenant amendments. Nice work. This case keeps paying dividends. I smiled and typed back, thanks for everything. Couldn't have done it without you. As I got ready for bed that night, I did my usual check of the security camera feeds. Everything was quiet in the neighborhood. Peaceful, the way it should be. I thought about Patricia, wherever she was now, hopefully learning from her mistakes. I thought about the HOA board members who had enabled her behavior until it became impossible to ignore. I thought about all the homeowners who had suffered under her petty tyranny but felt powerless to do anything about it. And I thought about my fence posts, which had inadvertently become the center of a much larger story about power, accountability, and justice. They were just pieces of wood, but they had represented something more, the principle that no one, regardless of their position or authority, has the right to take what doesn't belong to them or abuse the trust that has been placed in them. The legal case was over. The criminal prosecution was complete, the civil settlement had been paid, the reforms had been implemented, but the impact of what had happened would last much longer. The story of the stolen fence posts had become part of Riverside Meadows' community history, a cautionary tale and a reminder that vigilance and courage matter. I drifted off to sleep that night feeling content. Not because everything had turned out perfectly, there had been plenty of stress and frustration along the way, but because justice had been served and meaningful change had resulted from standing up for what was right. The next morning dawned clear and hot, typical for Gilbert in the summer. I made coffee and stood at my kitchen window, looking out at my backyard. The fence stood strong, casting long shadows in the early morning light. Beyond it, I could see my neighbors' yards, the community park, the familiar landscape of suburban Arizona. It was just a fence, but it was my fence, built according to the rules, approved through the proper channels, and ultimately defended through the legal system. It represented order, fairness, and the rule of law. It represented a community learning to govern itself better, and it represented one homeowner's refusal to be bullied or stolen from without consequences. I raised my coffee mug in a silent toast to the fence, to the cameras that had documented everything, to Marcus and Detective Cole, and everyone else who had helped along the way. But mostly to the principle that had guided me through the entire ordeal, that doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, is always worth it. The fence posts that Patricia had stolen and used for her deck were gone now, torn down by the new owners. But my fence remained, a testament to persistence, documentation, and the willingness to fight for justice. Every board, every post, every nail was a small victory against those who would abuse their power. And somewhere in Arizona, hopefully, Patricia Cunningham was learning that actions have consequences, that authority comes with responsibility, and that stealing fence posts to build your own deck is a really, really stupid crime to commit, especially when your victim has security cameras and a determination to see justice done. I finished my coffee and headed out to start my day. The fence post incident was behind me now, but its lessons remained. Document everything. Stand up for yourself. Support your community. Hold leaders accountable. And never ever assume that someone won't fight back just because it seems easier to let things go. My fence stood as a daily reminder of those lessons, visible from every angle of my backyard. It was more than just a property boundary. It was a monument to accountability, a symbol of community reform, and proof that one person standing up for what's right can make a real difference. And that, I thought, as I headed inside to get ready for work, was worth more than any fence posts could ever be.